It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. Take Command Podcast. It's Logan Paulsen. I am Craig Hoffman. And now it is time to talk about everything but the final play. Film review time, Logan. We obviously gloated, had our fun on Sunday at Northwest Stadium talking about the final play, but there is a ton to talk about in this game. So let's dive right in and let's start with the offense. And actually, the first note at the end of my offensive notes is B-Rob factor. Yeah. I think that Brian Robinson's impact in this game would be really interesting to measure. I don't know what the stat is. I don't know whether it would be like, it's like a hybrid between DVOA and EPA per play in terms of like how much better is the Commanders offense when he is on the field. But he started this game on fire. Things obviously from a production standpoint peter out from there. 5 carries for 35 yards on the first drive, 15 for just 30 on the rest of it. But even their play action game and some of these other things are way more effective, it seems like, when he's in there. When you watch how Cliff and the staff kind of set this game up and what they wanted to do offensively, what did you see, and especially when you talk about the running game?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because like you always leave the game excuse me, with some type of preconceived notion of what you're going to see on film. Like I left the game thinking like, man, it would have been nice if Cliff had kind of returned to some of those runs that were effective earlier. It would have been nice if they would have kind of used B-Rob more and all these different things. And you go back and watch the film and you're like, actually, Chicago just did a better job at defending kind of some of the same runs. You know, I think, for example, the 19-yard run in the first quarter is two things. Let me just take a step back. First off, this running game is most effective, I think, when we're in kind of some version of hurry up. And it just is kind of this repeating. It seems to develop some type of momentum and is able to overcome the inertia of kind of like huddle, set, let's go. Like, I don't think we're that kind of team. I think we're the best when we can kind of like muddle huddle at the line of scrimmage, get into this stuff, get those offensive linemen hands on hips, let our offensive linemen's conditioning take over and really let it rip. And I think you saw that perfectly in the first drive. And they run, like Wanda Y sift, and they're really good at that, right? And so Y sift is kind of when you have the, that bunch look to the right and the tight end who is Senator Bates usually comes back and cuts the backside defensive end, and they push across the formation, and that guy on the ball is blocking the safety, and B-Rob does such a great job of pressing it and cutting it back. Awesome job. And I thought, they should run that run more because it was really effective for them. And then I go back and watch it, and they ran it a bunch. And I will say that Chicago did a pretty good job, I thought, of kind of adjusting their approach. So that first run, I think, was versus a 7-man box. And obviously, like 7-man box, like we've talked about, just from a math standpoint, it helps out, right? When the math is right, you can run the ball effectively. So when you're in too high and you run a Wanda, run a GT, run a counter, whatever it is, like you have hats. You have more blockers than they have run defenders, so you should hit it well. As the game went on, I thought the Bears kind of became the Bears. Like it seemed like early on they were worried about the pass and how they're going to handle Jayden, and then they're kind of like, forget it. Let's get that extra player down in the box. Let's bring our first down, like nickel pressures. Let's bring that Sam off the edge. Let's do a little bit of line stunt work. And it really muddied up some of the runs, specifically on the gap team stuff. So they'd bring a stunt. The double team would get a little bit bloody. There'd be a little bit penetration. The linebacker would run through. They'd both kind of have to get off because of how the front had redistributed after the movement. And then the guy would make the tackle for a no-yard gain. So I just think there was a lot of stuff like that. And again, Cliff did a good job of kind of getting back to some of the runs that were effective. And then he tried to modify as the game went on. But the Bears just kind of seemed to have a good feel. And again, that's a really good defense. Like when you look at the defensive line, very effective. When you look at the linebackers, their range and their physicality, like there was a play I want to say in the third or fourth quarter where we run a Wanda where we pulled Biotish, and that's been a really effective run for us. You block that on the shade. So shade is the guy, he's going to line up on the right shoulder of the center. So the guard has a really good angle to block down on that player. Biotish pulls around and he pulls up for Edmonds, and Edmonds is a big guy. He's like 6'4", 6'5", 250, gets those long arms on him and is able to get some length off Biotish and is able to make a run, which from a number standpoint should be good, kind of as a null gain. So I think there was a lot of that kind of stuff going on early on, the inertia of the no huddle, the kind of modification and adjustment by the Bears defense. And again, as the personnel for the Bears kind of figured it out, it just became harder and harder to run the football.
Yeah, I think I felt the same thing watching it in terms of the line play in general in the hurry up. Because there's some times that there's some good pressure in this game from Chicago. And if Washington could just get that first down and get in no huddle, the game kind of opened up a little bit for them. And one overarching theme of this game that I think it's important to mention now, and we'll continue to mention it throughout here, because as we get into some of these drives, it becomes really important, is Chicago's punter put Washington in a ridiculous spot in this game. Torrey Taylor, just an unbelievable game for them, to the point that Washington started 5 drives at or inside its own 9-yard line versus Chicago. And since 2000, that's only happened 10 times. Shout out to Sam Fortier for looking that up. So we're talking about an unprecedented amount of grass that Washington had to cover. And so if they could get going a little bit, they would get going. But even if you gain 30, 40 yards, like, you're still not even in field goal range. And so the task here was so high, and it was really hard to sustain. But how they would kind of get moving, and some of those times that the pressure would start to ramp up, it would die off as drives went because their guys got tired. Yeah. And so from a pass rush standpoint, from a blocking standpoint in the run game, getting that first down was really, really important. And you saw the impact of that. And then the hard part is, can you not miss an assignment? Can you not have a penalty? And in a couple of cases, I get 2 touchdowns that were near misses. Obviously, the Ertz one, that's one that Zach catches most of the time. And, it was really, really close on the replay. I think it was a correct call, but really, really close. And then, the Zacchaeus touchdown, like, that's a total unforced error by Cosme. He just kind of wins too easily off the line and gets himself too upfield. But you see why it's so hard to sustain drives over the course of time. With that said, specific to B-Rob, I do feel like some of their play action stuff was really much more effective when he was in the game. Like, it seemed like the Bears just had so much more respect for him than Eckler, which was interesting because I thought Eckler could have a monster game because the Bears have been so prone to giving up these big explosive runs, which is kind of where Austin has shined this year. And they did a good job shutting that stuff down. They were really effective in terms of making sure that some of the play actions were covered up, and they were able to kind of even see through some of them. Like, there's one play where it's a play action to Eckler, and the linebacker is coming on a blitz. He doesn't even look at the run. Like, he just knows, and he just scotch-free. They're hoping that he's going to go attack the run. He doesn't, and he's got a beeline straight for Jayden. And so to watch kind of how Chicago treated that, I think was interesting. And then, like you said, they just did a really good job of some stuff that I think Washington, when you look forward, is going to be fine with against other teams. I mean, Cliff at times will have, like, Luke come back and crack a linebacker or a D end and stuff like that. And against Chicago, that's going to be pretty hard to do. Against a lot of defenses in this league, I think you can get away with that, and they have so far this year.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned some of the pressure stuff. I thought the Bears don't pressure, or they didn't pressure a ton, but when they did, it was effective. And I think they did a good job of disguising it. And you mentioned that one Austin Eckler run, like, that's a tough pro for the back because of how it's aligned, right? So basically, they're selling the run action to the left, and the back is responsible, I would assume, for the weak.
He comes back and tries to get him.
But and so I've always been a part of offenses where if that's the case and you have any anticipation that guy's going to blitz, you have to abort the ball fake and just go right now because of exactly what happened. You end up getting picked by the quarterback coming back, and you can't get a good block on the guy. So that's a well-designed run. It kind of fits. It's kind of the antithesis of what that play is designed to block up well. I thought they had another one later. You pointed this out too. It was in the fourth quarter, 11:28 left, and they're running kind of a pop pass. So pop pass is when you got, your 5 offensive linemen, your tight ends to the right, you're pulling the left guard. Like, the left guard will pull over to the front side. And the Bears did this not all the time, but they did it enough to be annoying, is they would kind of show you rotation, right? So they'd kind of have the in this case, the Mike linebacker kind of walk out to the offensive right, and the safety rotation would look like he's blitzing from the right. So they'd kind of call the pro to the right, and then they would blitz the nickel. So they did a really good job in that instance of disguising the pressure. And also, like we talked about how in the Austin Eckler pressure or sack, I think it ends up being, that's kind of a perfect blitz for that protection. The nickel pressure versus pop, like a pop protection, is perfect. Like, I remember when I was with Kyle and Sean and Jay for the year, and then when I was with Dow Log, every offensive coordinator I was with, you like pop pass protection because it really pulls that weak side linebacker down into the run fit and you can block it up. But if there's a 5-man rush, you hate it. Or if there's a backside 3 technique, for example, you hate it because it really stresses the center. And so here they've shown pressure to the front side. So all the offensive linemen are kind of waiting for the line to stunt. So the front side defensive end should stunt, the front side nose should stunt, the 3 technique should stunt. And you're kind of waiting, they're all kind of waiting for that. And then they end up bringing the nickel pressure from the other side. And right where the guard is vacating the pull. So first off, you don't like that protection versus pressure anyway. You are okay with it to the front side, which you think you're getting, and everyone kind of plays it that way. Then the next play, which is really interesting, I think, is they show the exact same contour. They call the protection to the nickel, and then they bring the Mike linebacker, or the Sam linebacker off the edge to the front side. So they end up having the slide side to the nickel, which would make sense based on the previous rotation. Then the man sides to the offensive right. You squeeze the protection, and then you have a free runner to the quarterback. So that didn't happen all the time, but I think there were 3 examples there where you saw kind of what makes the Bears a good defense. Obviously, we talked about the run stuff on the first and second down. They had enough of these third down kind of little tricky, nuanced pressures to be annoying and frustrating. And again, it was kind of just good defense throughout with a couple of those kind of special plays. I don't even know if they're special, just kind of right call, right time versus the call.
Flus is a good DC. I mean, he's a good play caller. He's a good, obviously, defensive schemer. They have not given up 21 points in 13 straight games now. With that
true?
Said, yeah.
That's
and
crazy.
Which some of that is against terrible teams this year, but that goes back to last year. And they played the Lions during that stretch. Like they played some good offenses at the end of last year.
13 straight games?
13 straight games they've given up 21 or less.
That's insane. Wow, that's really impressive. I didn't know. I knew they were good in watching the film. I didn't know they were that consistent. Let's just say.
They are, and they did it obviously this week without Brisker and without Gordon, 2 of their best DBs. Maybe it could have been helpful on a Hail Mary play. I don't know. But here's what I will say. With that said, Chicago, excellent job. Washington shot themselves in the foot. Ultimately, they could have easily scored 30 in this game. And this is just purely if they don't make silly mistakes that they typically don't make. Like, it's one thing when you watch Chicago's offenses, we'll talk about. Like, Chicago making silly mistakes offensively is kind of who they've been the entire year.
Right.
Washington has had games like that. The New York game, for instance, they kicked 7 field goals, and Austin Seibert's like, hello, welcome, I'm Austin Seibert, and I don't miss from inside 40 yards. In part because they do some of that stuff. And so they've had a couple of games like that. But they also have games like Arizona and Cincinnati where they're super clean, and that's how they continually put up the point totals that they do. And in this game, they just had a couple bad ones. They have the illegal man downfield that calls the OZ touchdown off. They have a couple of other penalties in the red zone that just absolutely kill them. And I will say it feels like when they've gotten penalties, Logan, it often is in the red zone. And this is where I just lean on your playing experience here. Like, is that a kind of a thing where you've been driving, and you've been on the field for a while, you're a little bit tired, you got to finish and you lose focus for a second? Like, what is the reason why, if there is a reason, why that some of these things keep happening to them in the red zone?
Yeah, I think sometimes and again, it's team dependent. So it could be, maybe it is a fatigue issue. I don't think that's why. Usually, in my experience, if you're getting bogged in the red zone, one, it's harder for the quarterback. Just generally, it's harder for the quarterback. Also, most play callers tend to shift because the defense does different stuff. For example, Chicago ran a little bit more Tampa 2 or Red 2, as Fletch would call it, where the corners are in 2, but they get a little bit deeper. The mic gets a little bit deeper. The throwing windows get super tight. And so you want to start calling plays to kind of minimize the effectiveness of what they do in the red zone. So like Shane Bowen, the guy we play in a couple of weeks, like he'll probably run some form of Red 2 or red quarters, it's different. And so you have to call plays differently, and the timing is a little bit different, and the windows are a little bit different. And so you're almost running, being maybe a little bit hyperbolic here, but not by much. You're running a different offense. And so sometimes guys are not quite as familiar with the offense. And also it's important for you to shift as a player to the differences in defensive structure. So they might be bringing more pressure. They might rush a little bit differently in the red zone, whatever that is. And so sometimes I think those adjustments pop up. You know what I mean? They kind of, like, your lack of awareness in those situations kind of pop up. And I think that can be a little bit challenging. So I think that's what I'd kind of point to, is sometimes it's different. Also, in this game specifically, I thought there was a couple that were a little ticky-tack. You mentioned the illegal man downfield on the OZ touchdown. That's a straight pre-snap read. And he's like 2.5 yards down the field. I think they have a legal box of 1 yard, and so that's very, very close. The big explosive play to Diami in the other, and I think it was in the second quarter, where it's
Allegretti downfield. That one's pretty bad.
That one's pretty egregious for sure. But again, like that's like not being on the details. That's like, so this is going to sound crazy. It's like, well, how do you not be an illegal man downfield? It's like that you have rules as an offensive lineman. Are you covered? Are you uncovered? Because it changes your footwork on the screen. And so they've been very, very deliberate this entire year with their screen footwork specifically about, hey, I'm uncovered. I'm going to take 2 lateral steps. I'm going to take a breath, and then I'm going to run to my spot. And they've been really, really good at that. And then obviously Allegretti kind of loses his mind. Usually he's covered. Maybe I don't want to speculate.
Well, and also on that one too, like he makes a key block. So who knows if that thing even gets out if he's not downfield illegally, because that linebacker that he winds up blocking might wind up tackling Diami for 4 yards.
Yeah, and so there's that. So there's 2 plays like that. Obviously, then there's the one that Zach drops in the end zone, which, like if you're playing with your buddies in the parking lot, is a catch. But again, he doesn't survive the ground. He doesn't get both feet. Whatever their reasoning was for not having the catch. Then there's the other drive in the second quarter, second drive of the game, where it's that 2 red kind of coverage, and they just didn't feel like they had a great answer for it. And in that drive sequence too, I totally forgot about it. They had a false start, remember, that backed them up. They were like inside they had just had a nice play. They were inside the 10. They had a penalty, backed them up. And
Big Trent Scott did not have a quality outing in this one. What's that? I said Big Trent Scott did not have a quality outing in this one, and that was on him, I believe. But yeah, they're like 3rd and 2, and then you wind up in 3rd and 7, and you'd much rather be in 3rd and 2 than 3rd and 7. Not as bad as the Bears, who had a drive where they had a 3rd and 2, and then 2 penalties later had 3rd and 12.
Yeah,
so that's nice.
And so again, like some of that, you're bringing new personnel onto the field. And in the Trent Scott case, you're getting your heavy personnel, you bring them out on the field. Like he's not really in game flow. I think that's another reason why they're kind of maybe bogging down. And it kind of speaks to the difference in offense. But I do think that's something that has popped up a couple times this year. And there's a reason it pops up. We talk about situational football all the time, 2-minute red zone, short yardage, all those situations. And I think the team's been very good in a couple of those. But the main thing I'd point to is the penalties. And I think you asked why that is. And sometimes that's because, there's new people on the field, new offense, new defense. You're not quite ready for the adjustment.
Yeah, for sure. Which that brings us to the quarterback play, which I think if people want to be happy, this is the part of the podcast that's for you. Take Command Podcast. That's Logan Paulson. I am Craig Hoffman. And for all of the ways in which the offense was obviously good, they had 481 yards. And for the ways that they struggled, some of the drops, some of the penalties, dude, on tape, I knew Jayden had a pretty good game. On tape, this thing is sick. He just continually overcomes bad situations. Hey, all right, you dropped one? Fine. I throw a ridiculous cover 2 ball to Terry McLaurin that Terry kind of mistimes his jump a little bit, goes through his hands. How about next play I hit you for 60? How about, there's a free blitzer coming. I see it. Let me run out. Let me hop, skip, and jump over the tackler and get a first down. With his arms, with his legs, Jayden Daniels continues to be that freaking dude. And that is before you even get to the Hail Mary, which, is some combination of skill and luck at the end.
Yeah, and it was really interesting to watch the All-22 because, is he the most accurate he's ever been? No. Is he, there was some, talking to some other media people, it's, that ball placement isn't perfect. That's not in the right spot. I mean, this is maybe, I don't want to be exaggerate here, but this is maybe my favorite game of his to watch because I felt like the difficulty level defensively was really ramped up. I felt like he had to make a lot of tough throws. I feel like he had to throw under pressure. There was a lot of people in his lap in the pocket. Got to give credit to Cliff. I think he does such a great job of creating space in the back end. And again, you have pieces like Zach who understands how to kind of create separation and find those windows. And I think on the first completion of Zach, it's a little kind of pull concept. So you get a 5-yard sit, a flat, and a dig. Everybody in the NFL runs it. And, Jayden kind of looks down the sit. Edmonds kind of attaches to the sit, hits Zach over the middle of the field. Great catch. And that seems easy, but throwing the ball over the middle field, manipulating the hook player, Like, that's big time stuff. And that ball's maybe not the best ball of all time. Zach's got to fall down to get it, but the process to get there was excellent. The deep ball to Terry couldn't have been better. And just his ability to consistently elevate. Like, I was kind of like, why did the offense seemingly struggle at times in this game? And there were times where it's like, oh, we have a negative run, or we've got a penalty, or we have an incomplete pass on first down. And then Jayden Daniels just puts on a Superman cape and scrambles for a first down. And he does that probably 3 times in the game. You mentioned the one where he kind of kicks out and does that craziness. That's a free runner off the nickel pressure, like we just talked about. And I don't want to hype him up too much, but in terms of things you appreciate, you're like, man, like, this is a really solid game. And I think his stat line is 21 for, 37, something like that.
I got the box score in front of me. He went 21 of 38 for 326 and a touchdown.
And I want to say I charted at least 4 drops, probably 5. And
that also is like, for instance, another play where he kind of he elevates and it's this close. First drive of the game, last play before the field goal. Montez Sweat winds up winning. It's a really tough block for Wiley.
Yeah.
And Sweat wins, flushes him out. And Luke is wide open in the back of the end zone. But because Montez is in his face, he can't get just enough on it that he can get the ball there in time before defenders can recover and get back to Luke. But if Luke has a size bigger foot, he's able to get that toe tap. And to get that ball off in that situation is crazy. And it's that close. So there, you got the 4 drops. You have that one that's not really on him because he's got Montez Sweat in his face. You have a couple others that are like that as well. Like, the numbers, when you go 28 for 38 or 21 for 38 for 326 and a touchdown, and it still doesn't explain how good you were in the game, like, that's a hell of a football game from a quarterback.
Yeah. And I think it's like the down to down elevation of the offense was pretty cool to see. Like, because again, there were times like where you could tell that they didn't, the Commanders didn't really have an answer offensively, like for what the Bears had presented. Like, the Bears were kind of winning the down, and sometimes that happens. Like, you call the best play possible, but they've got good players too, and it doesn't quite work out. And he buys a little bit of time or makes a really great anticipatory throw, and again, that was really cool to see. Most of his scrambles. I think we were kind of talking about his last one in the game where it's the 3rd and 5. Maybe could have stayed in the pocket, but most of them he's got a good feel. Nobody's open really. It's a little bit muddy. You don't love it, and you're able to scramble and get a first down on a play on a look where you're kind of like, man, this isn't exactly what we want. This is a kind of a risky throw, and I think that kind of stuff is just impressive. Like his poise and his composure, and we talk about that all the time, but the moment never seems too big. And then to think about that he didn't really really practice this week. He threw, obviously, like they talked about the workout they did on Friday, but like for him to get to this level of preparation and to play with this level of consistency in this game off kind of like an abridged or a different type of week structure for him, was pretty impressive, and I saw Dan in his presser, someone asked him Jayden didn't look quite like himself. And Dan was like, man, I thought he played great. Like, I see and I feel what Dan's talking about there, because I think he did a great job.
Yeah, and this is a credit to Jayden and also a credit to the organization and Cliff and how the offensive organization, I'll call it, in terms of how they practice and prepare that allowed them to do it. And I don't think a lot of teams can. One, Jayden is in his virtual reality headset and in his walkthroughs and all that stuff that didn't require him to throw a football. And he just kept doing all of that stuff the same that he always would. And so he mentally was as prepared as you possibly can be. And then also they do all those walkthroughs during the day.
Yeah.
And he was able to participate in those. So even though he was a DNP in actual practice, he still participated in a lot of stuff that he needs to be ready. And that is a credit to, again, how they prepare, which is a matchup with how he prepares and everybody continuing to do their jobs just in case he was ready to go. And then sure enough, he was ready to go. The other thing that stood out to me is some of the throws from an anticipation standpoint that he makes. The Ertz almost touchdown, like that one maybe is a hair late, but it's still like Zach's not quite out of his break fully yet before he throws that, and he's got to throw it like that. And really, that's one where if Zach, like I actually think a younger Zach Ertz catches that pretty easily. Where he can like go up, snatch it, and turn and protect his body a little bit more, and he's just not quite as twitched up as he was in his early 20s, because none of us are. But there's another play to Ertz with 14:26 to go in the third quarter. So this is the third play of the third quarter. They hit a De'Ami Brown screen to start the quarter. And then actually, no, sorry. I think this is actually the second play of the third quarter. They hit De'Ami on a screen for 6 yards. And then Jayden puts a ball literally between 5 Bears players. I think it's a CO situation.
It's a sale concept, yeah.
Oh, is it sale? Yeah, because Terry's running the high corner, and then Zach is running underneath it on a deeper. It's like an intermediate level out, and Jayden has to throw the ball exactly when he does, and it is literally between 5 dudes, and you're just like, okay, that's what we're doing now. And so I think that's something that's been fun to watch on the quarterbackiness scale, if you will, Logan, is to watch him continue to throw with more and more and more anticipation and more situations. And you're not going to see a throw that's more anticipatory and perfect in terms of placement and all that kind of stuff than a throw deep to the outside against 5 or in between 5 dudes to your tight end.
Yeah, and again, like a lot of things going on here. I'm really glad you brought this play up because it is an excellent throw. I think the play design is also excellent with Cliff. They kind of, getting in this split back, kind of orbit motion, put a little window dressing on it. This is a play that they've run a ton this year, and it's good that they've found different ways to kind of formationally hide it. So they pull the backside guard, comes to the front side. They get the linebackers to step up a little bit, but good kudos to the Bears. They get a little bit of depth, right? And so this is NFL open, significantly open, like when he's getting ready to throw the football. But I think it's, like you said, the touch, the layering, understanding that the window's secure. Like I think the other thing is, like Terry, you mentioned, is running kind of that, I'm going to call it a pylon, like you're going to run that corner, that high corner to kind of clear it out. Understanding that the DB to that side is not looking at you is also a big thing. Like he is a zone player technically. And so that's something that I really appreciate is he had a completion also earlier to Zach, and we'll get back to this play in a second, where there's a little bit of pressure. They're trying to take a play action shot, and the DB, it's a linebacker, Edwards, is dropping to a spot, but he's running with his back to the ball, and Jayden throws the football to Zach kind of out and away. And if the linebacker was looking, it would have made an interception, but Zach's able to adjust to it and make the play. But understanding kind of what NFL open is and thinking about him versus Tampa Bay and how he didn't really understand that yet. Like, oh, the DB's positioned like this, I can make this throw. And I think this is a really good example to your point of saying, oh, the DB, the corner is kind of, or the safety is kind of looking away so that that's protecting the throw enough for me to get the ball there. I can layer this throw up and over this linebacker because of the ball fake, because of the guard pull. It's given me enough of a window. And then trusting Zach to like make a play. It is open at the start, but it closes very quickly. And there was a lot of plays like that, in this game where I thought, man, like that's just a really nice throw. He had to come back to Terry, same type of deal. He had a couple of those like in breaking routes over the middle of the field where he's throwing with good anticipation, gets the ball to him. So, yeah, man, like I know we don't want to gush about him too much, but like he did each week he seems to be getting better. And in a week where he didn't practice, it's also very cool to see him continue that improvement.
Yeah, for sure. Other things that I really liked is just the intentionality of getting Terry the football in key situations. Even like to the point of at the end of the game, the play before the Hail Mary, it's like, which guy do we want to run the out? Our best player. Like there's some stuff of that with Cliff. And then also there's some big spots where I think Jayden's clearly looking for Terry. So Terry 5 for 125 in this game since week 2. Where the first 2 weeks, his numbers were not that great, struggled a little bit. I think Cliff was figuring out how Terry really should be getting the football. Since then, 6 games, he's had 98 yards or more in 4 of them. 300-yard games and a 98er, and then 52 and 53 in the other one. So that's really good stuff to see between Jayden and Terry. I think the other thing that I would wonder is the Bears were able to do obviously some stuff in terms of preventing them from scoring. We talked about how a lot of that was self-inflicted, the penalties, but is there anything that you see, and I'll open it back up to the whole offense, not just the run game or not just the pass game here in Jayden. Is there anything that if I'm New York this week, if I'm Pittsburgh in 2 weeks, if I'm Philly in 3 weeks, that I look at this tape and go, oh, okay, maybe this is something that we should do because this Bears team did a better job stopping this offense than anybody else has in weeks.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything that jumps out. I think obviously the thing that I came away with is the 8-man boxes versus the run, kind of making sure you have enough resources allocated to that is going to make it tough. I also thought some of the stuff they did in lighter boxes, so even when they were in 2 shells, the line movement stuff was interesting. And it seemed to present enough issues for the offensive line in certain situations that it just decreased the rushing efficiency enough that we're talking about it today. I think the other thing was the blitz, like how we're calling our protections, I think was the other thing that I noticed in this. Like you could maybe exploit some of those. Oh, we got the rotation here. That's the guy we're working to. Oh no, we're bringing it this way. But that's just kind of good ball. You know what I mean? That's just like good football 101. And so I don't know if teams will adopt some of that stuff, but those things kind of popped up. But on the whole, like to your initial point, like there wasn't anything egregious that I thought, because like you said, they did move the football, and if it's not for 2 illegal men downfield, there was a offsides in the red zone.
Noah had a really bad drop early in the red zone.
Who?
Noah Brown.
Yeah, he did. He had a
drop.
bad.
What happened to that guy by the end of the game? By the way, did he make up for that at the end?
I think he did. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, those are 4 on 4 drives into the red zone or low red where like we were in total control. And even the one to Zach Ertz, like that's a really tough catch. And I'm not like, this is not me saying, oh, Zach's got, Zach make the play. But like even that play, it's like those are legitimate 5 opportunities right there where we should be getting probably touchdowns. So as much as you want to give credit to the Bears, like if we make the plays or the offense makes the plays that they're supposed to make, I think we're probably okay. And again, if Jayden keeps elevating and the offense keeps elevating, because like Cliff again, we talk about Cliff a lot. He does such a good job of creating these opportunities for these athletes, and then Jayden does a great job of executing it. So the whole picture kind of works really well together. So to me, it just comes down to executing. And this isn't executing like, and I know in years past, I'm like, the offense has to execute better. It's like, it's well schemed, it's well designed. There are people open, there's space. We just got to hit some of these throws, and hit on some of these opportunities, and not shoot ourselves in the foot.
Yeah, no penalties and catch the football. Yeah. And like Jayden, twice more, can you be more accurate? Like on a 38 throws where you were mostly accurate. I mean, that would be like, now we're getting back into Cincinnati, like 80-90% territory. You know what this game actually reminded me of, though, Logan, to wrap up here? This reminded me of the New York game the first time around. They won. They shot themselves in the foot and couldn't finish any drives. And the next 5 games that they went on, they scored 38 against Cincinnati, 42 against the Cardinals, 34 against the Browns, 23 against the Ravens, and then 40 against Carolina. So if this is the little bit of a wake-up call to like, hey, let's lock back in on some of the details, let's learn our lessons, to use Dan's language, then I look out New York, who, by the way, lost last night and benched Deonte Banks. So good times there. Things are going great for Big Blue. We'll see what they can do, because Trustway barely punted in that or was that game he didn't punt at all, or did he punt once
at all
in that
game?
Yeah, back-to-back weeks he didn't punt. So good times. So we'll see how they correct all that stuff coming up against the Giants on Sunday. Take Command Podcast, that's Logan Paulson. I am Craig Hoffman, and now it is time to look at a Washington defense that was really outstanding for 3.5 quarters. And then we can talk about what happened there at the end of the fourth. But let's start with, at the beginning, Logan. What was it that Joe Witt Jr. was doing and that these players were doing that made it so impossible for Chicago to move the ball? Or is it actually a better question to ask, what was Chicago doing to itself that made it so impossible for Chicago to move the ball?
Like with these questions all the time, it's a little bit of both. And so what I would say is the defensive secondary seems to be playing man coverage with better leverages, like understanding where your help is. They're not trying to take everything away all at once. And I think back to Tampa Bay and how much improved it is from them, and that's awesome. I think about the zone coverages and how they kind of understand where they need to be and the positions they need to be in to take away certain things and what they're okay with giving away. So that's excellent. I also see guys that are more confident in the back end, specifically about taking shots and being aggressive downhill. Like I think about the St. Juice play on the 4th and 1 where he sees the bubble screen and just triggers downhill right now. All great stuff. The linebackers, Bobby Wagner, his ability to kind of captain the defense and get everything communicated, excellent. Frankie Louvu as a pass rusher. Like Jeremy Chin, I thought had a great game as a run player and made some really nice big plays and tackles and things like that. Defensive line's playing better. That's all true. That's 100% true. However, Caleb Williams struggled very badly in this game for 3 quarters. And what I mean by that is like there are times where, again, this is not all on him. Like sometimes the offensive line's having issues with protection, but there are open players, like NFL open players. Like we just talked about with Jayden, how he was able to find some of those NFL open opportunities and deliver the football. And there were opportunities in this game for NFL open players. And Caleb Williams just didn't uncork the ball, and he ended up scrambling around, and maybe he ran for 3 yards or maybe whatever. But there, versus Joe Burrow hit some of those plays. And now, is it improved since they played Cincinnati? Yes. And are those opportunities on a down-to-down basis, at least to my eye, significantly less? Yes. But I think the level of quarterback in this game elevated the defensive production for the first 3 quarters. And again, they deserve some credit for that because, again, like I said, the down-to-down consistency is significantly better. But there are times where you're like, this is a 3rd and 5. Why aren't you throwing this out? Like, throw the out. It's open. Throw it. And there was a time, I think it was on the first drive of the game or the second drive of the game, where Frankie Louvu does an excellent job breaking on a 5-yard out by Cole Kmet. He pumps it, pulls it back, and Frankie Louvu is still running because he's like, oh, I missed it. He could easily just recork and throw it back to tight end, but he gets unsettled and tries to scramble, and it ends up being a sack. So I just look at that and I say defense did a great job, but also the Bears, and you can talk about Shane Waldron and this position he put Caleb in because I don't think it was an ideal position for him. But it takes both to have a defensive performance like the way they did for the 3 quarters where you're shutting the team out. And I think that's it's kind of a confluence of things.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. Like they were mostly sticky in coverage, definitely some opportunities that Caleb missed. Pass rush was good. And like I think it's interesting because the pass rush was good, but also they didn't finish, which is frustrating on one hand. And you have to give, well, sometimes Caleb's under pressure because of Caleb. It's also him getting out of pressure. And if it's not, I think I said this on the radio show yesterday, if it's not Caleb, frankly, Jayden, like Lamar or Mahomes, these guys that just somehow always get out of pressure, maybe Josh Allen, let's throw in there too, then this defense has like 7 or 8 sacks in this game. They had 25 pressures per PFF. 25. They pressured Caleb on 61% of his dropbacks, and they only came out with, I think, 3 sacks. So it's really impressive in some ways of what Caleb was able to do to escape, but also the way that both Chicago's offense and how it's designed and how it's called invites pressure, and the way that Caleb and how he sees the field invites pressure, I think is indicative of some of those numbers as well. So it's to your point, a lot of both.
Yeah, and I think you got to give credit where credit's due. And I think when you go back and watch the film, to me, pressures are an interesting statistic because, like, what actually qualifies as a pressure? Because it's not a true free runner, it's not a quick win. But I do think, and there are games where teams will have a high pressure number, but it doesn't feel that way. In this game, it definitely felt like they had a lot of pressures, and they had 36 like pass rush attempts in this game, and that's keepers and quick game and all that kind of stuff, screens. But I do think that Joe Witt Jr., that defensive line, did a great job. And like, did they have to maximize matchups? Yeah, the left tackle Jones goes out. Amadiji, the kid from Yale, comes in, and I think he's got a very high ceiling, but Frankie Louvu definitely had his number and understood how to win in one-on-one situations. I thought Bobby Wagner had some excellent pressures up the middle in terms of blitzes. And did they maximize? Did they finish those? No. But again, we talked about how Caleb Williams is missing guys open down the field. And some of those, like on some of these pressure snaps you're talking about, there are guys open, but Bobby Wagner's blowing, like literally killing the running back. There is no way he can see around it, and I have to pull the ball down and try to make something happen. So I think that's something else that, like, while the sack number's low, I think the good coverage number also is related, in my opinion, to how well they rushed the passer and just how consistently they did it. And they seem to have a very good plan also for how to rush the passer. They ran a lot of ETs. They ran some 3-man games where they're pinching, 2 defensive tackles across, and they're bringing that third guy Payne all the way around, and they've got Frankie Louvu kind of run and contain as he runs the arc. So they did a lot of good stuff in that department. And so you deserve, like, as much as you want to say, oh, that needs to be better, and it does. They need to finish some of those. The pressure helps the coverage, and it makes a young quarterback look a little bit more unsettled, and I think that's extremely important to acknowledge because they did a great job.
How do you feel like they played against the run, 56-yard carry notwithstanding? I felt like in watching it live, they did a little better than they did in terms of going back and watching it. You're like, oh, these some of these that I thought maybe were 3
Yeah.
2-yard gains. Like there's some 5 and some 6s. Like
Yeah.
Swift got a couple. So obviously there's only one like really explosive one. It's not like there's also 18 and 19-yard carries. Like it was just kind of consistently 5 and 6. What did you make of how they played the run in this game?
Yeah, I think that's something that jumps out to me upon review because I remember leaving thinking, oh, well, they did a great job against the run, minus the explosive run of Swift. And then you go back and you watch it like, oh, this isn't that great. This could be better. And there are some really good ones in there, but I think it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't as good as what it was leaving the stadium. And I think after that explosive 56-yard run, they found some momentum and were able to kind of find a couple explosive runs. There's the one where he hurls the guy, and there's the reverse kind of action to DJ Moore for an explosive play. So there's a couple plays like that. And I do think if they had been more consistent, they being the Chicago Bears, at sustaining drives, if Caleb had been a little bit more efficient, that run game thing would have been a little bit more of an issue. And I think we've seen that with our own offense. Like in this game, for example, obviously the rushing efficiency was down to what it's been, and Jayden Daniels was able to supplement it. But there are games where, because of Jayden Daniels' ability to kind of keep this offense on schedule, B-Rob's able to get more touches, and you're able to find explosive opportunities and explosive runs just because he's getting more opportunities. And I think back to the first New York Giants game, for example, where he ends up having like 30 carries or 25 carries, something like that. And a lot of that is just because you're able to sustain drives and get him more touches, get him more hands on the football. And so in this game, if that kind of game flow, if that kind of offensive efficiency from the quarterback, Caleb Williams, rears its head, I do think the running game for the Bears becomes a little bit more of an issue. And again, you got to give credit to the defense because they were able to, through the pressures, through the coverages, manage Caleb Williams. But against a more efficient quarterback, it could be problematic potentially.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch some of those plays because sometimes it's kind of alignment. Like Chicago does a good job on a couple toss cracks, and their receiver, or it's actually, I keep thinking it's a receiver. It's not. Gerald Everett's a tight end who wears 14, so he looks like he's a receiver. But he'll come down and crack Dante Fowler, and you're like, oh, that's if you know what's coming, you're watching Fowler going, that's not about to be good. Look outside, buddy. And Quan or Chin or St. Juice, like some of these. They'll come down and play the run, and DBs are making tackles for 5 yards. And like a DB making a tackle for 5 yards is a good job by the DB.
Right.
But the ease with which Luvu is getting reached or Wagner's getting blocked, like the front needed to eat a little bit more in terms of the double teams and making sure that those second level guys stay clean. But sometimes, and I think this has kind of been the story of the year for Washington defensively against the run, is they'll have some of those, but then they'll go make a -2,
100%.
and all of a sudden you're in 2nd and 12. Now Caleb's got to make plays. He can't do it, and that's how drives stall out. And I think the other part of that is even without making that having that run stuff, and again, I can look it up here once you start reacting to this. I'll pull up the next gen stats and look at their stuff percentage and where they rank. But if you can just have them make sure that these gains are 5 and not 25, Chicago's an offense that's going to shoot themselves in the foot eventually. Like they committed so many penalties on sustained drives in this game where it was either like some of the only drives in the game where they don't commit penalties and don't make a silly mistake. It's because they went 3 and out. And so if you can make sure that you don't give up explosives and make teams earn it, they're probably not going to. And I think that was another point of Chicago in this game. And whether it was just, all right, hey, we made the tackle for 5 yards, live to see another down, or we get to that stuff point where it's now 2nd and 12 and the whole offense has to change. I think Washington did a good job of that until the 56-yarder.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, like that's exactly right. Like when you're watching defensive football, it's really interesting because offensively, you're like, oh, this guy's got to be in this position. This is the timing, and this is how this has got to look, and it's got to kind of layer out in a very specific way. But with defense, it's a little bit more loose. There's more opportunities. It's a little bit more subjective, right? There are, oh, this guy should be here, but can he get there a little bit quicker? I don't know if that's a realistic expectation. And it's the same thing when you're charting the game. It's like, oh, here's a 3rd and 2, here's a 3rd and 1. But can you get to those downs consistently? And I think to the team's credit, when they have been in a 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6, after a stuffed run, after an incomplete pass, they have maximized those opportunities. Like I even think back to the Cincinnati game where they were able to kind of create a negative run, even if it's in the low red, kind of what you mentioned, stuff percentage, and then they're able to win in 3 downs. And really that's all it comes down to, because it doesn't matter really, total yards doesn't really matter. It just matters how many points you score. And I think this team in this game, you're right, even when there was kind of maybe an explosive run or a run of 6, they were able the next play to either get a sack, get a pressure, get an incomplete pass. They're in 3rd and 4, and then they were able to win that down. And so I think, again, like, I'm not trying to detract or take away anything from what they did in this game, because it's a very good performance. And like you said, I think they do what they have to do consistently enough to be good. And as they kind of shore up the details, which they've done week on week, with the leverages and coverages, the rush plan up front, working together in terms of stunts, they've just gotten more and more efficient. And then those opportunities come up more and more for the defense, essentially.
Yeah, Washington now 9th in stuff percentage in the league. They were as high as 3rd early in the year. Those are very small sample size, but they're still top 10. Like, they will, if you have to try to sustain a drive against them, they will eventually make a play. And whether it's Wagner, Luvu, Payne, Mathis had one in this game where they get behind the line of scrimmage, or for stuff, I don't even think it has to be. Let me see if there's a definition that's easily accessible here. No, it doesn't have one. But I think it's anything that's like a gain of 2 or less. So you get 2nd and 8, and that's not an optimal situation for an offense either. Yeah, 100%. All right, so then we get to the end of the game. It was good job, Washington, for 3.5 quarters. Then what happened from the 56-yard run and then the sustained drive after that?
Yeah, and I think in the same way that Washington had bad field position, it definitely, like, people talk about the field position battle, and this, I think, definitely showed up in the second half. There's the punt. Excellent punt by their punter where it goes out of bounds at like the 1 yard line. Washington goes, I think, 3 and out on that drive, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think it actually went. They marked it at the 9, which I was like, hey, that's a great spot for Washington, because it felt like it went out at the 1. But they marked that at the 9. Washington goes 3 and out.
I'm thinking of the fumble maybe where they're really backed up, right? They were like on the goal line and they go 3 and out and they're like locked up.
Yeah, there's one inside like the 4. Yeah.
Yes, and so basically, like, everyone's like, oh, play the field position. This is a really good example of what that means. Is then you're punting from your own end zone, and then they get the ball in like the 40. And then that drive distance is much more sustainable, much more manageable. They found a little bit of magic. They get a couple of runs. Caleb Williams does his thing, escaping the pocket off schedule. And they're in the same way that we had momentum early on in this game on that first drive where we kind of had this, we were like galloping down the field. They had the same thing going on, and they just started making plays. And I know that's not necessarily great analysis, but sometimes that's what happens, right? Like
one of the plays on that drive is Caleb, talk about an NFL open throw, the pylon that he hits to Moore. Like, that's a sick throw.
Yeah, it's a sick throw. And then the play, I think it's the play before where he rolls out to his right.
Oh, they'll throw back to Allen?
And throws back to Allen, right?
Yeah.
And the first quarter, he had a similar opportunity and completely missed it. And so this time he hits it, and then he hits the one to Moore. And it's like, all of a sudden, like, these plays that they weren't hitting before, they're hitting at kind of a clip, and then the defense is tired. They get down inside the 5, and they score a touchdown. So to me, it kind of encapsulates this argument we're making about the defense. Like, when the offense is making plays and executing in a way that they should, NFL defense against anybody is very, very challenging. And so on that drive, they kind of flicked the switch. They had a couple explosive runs. They had a couple explosive passes, and they're able to kind of build some inertia. But it all starts, to me, with the initial field position. Because when you're on the 40, as a play caller, you can be much more aggressive. You can be much more assertive in terms of what you want to call. And I think it showed up on that drive for sure.
On the 56-yarder, anything in particular that you found interesting?
Which one?
The Swift touchdown.
Yeah, obviously there was a couple of questionable, like, maybe that's a hold, maybe that's a tackle. Like, you can't do that as a blocker.
You're not allowed to, like, grab a dude by the shoulder pads and pull him down. All right, like, it's one of those where offensive linemen do it, and you're like, if it's your guy, you're like, oh, that's a nasty play, good block. But if you're a defensive guy, you're like, that's a hold, because one of the linemen got yanked down by his shoulder pads before the play basically even starts, and then dude pancakes him. Yeah, and then you have Mikey getting held to the point of attack, and then
that was the one for me that was like the one where the Kieran Amadiji, the left tackle, pulls out. That guy can really move, by the way. Gets out in space, does a great job initially, and then kind of goes to refit, and the DB kind of shakes him, and he just, like, kind of grabs him around the neck. And I understand you're not like technically holding him with your hands, but I've seen that play called in space a bunch on offensive linemen. So I was like, could have called that one. But I will say on the 56-yard run, like finish to the ball. Like I understand this is an explosive run. I understand there's probably should have been a penalty, but don't leave it in the officials' hands. And we talked about this post game, and I feel even more strongly about it now after watching the play. Like, why are we standing around? Like, run to the ball. You've done a great job all game of doing that, and this is the first time that you really didn't happen. And obviously it leads to an explosive play. And like, that's why on defense, like good things happen to those who run. Like St. Just, Sanders still, like like he's held. And then he kind of is like jogging after the play. If he just runs as hard as he can, maybe he makes the play. The backside player, I forget who it is. If they're running as hard as they can maybe get that out of the end zone, and then you can hold them to a field goal. And we're not having this conversation about the Bears developing this inertia into the fourth quarter.
Yeah, one guy who did run got absolutely dump trucked on that play out of kind of a wacky way was Jeremy Chin. He was pursuing hard of the ball, and one of the old linemen goes and makes a block, and then as he does, he falls and he winds up tripping Chin.
Yeah, I saw that.
Which I don't think is a penalty. Like, I think that contact is incidental. I'm not saying tripping in terms of like that was, if it's intentional, it is. I don't think he was like, hey, let me Superman and throw my body backwards. But man, Chin was trying hard, and then he's just like, I am in the air flying. That's not fun. But yeah, obviously 30 yards and not a touchdown, considering how Chicago was executing for most of that game. A lot better than 56 yards and a touchdown, and it is a very different conversation. All right, so that is our film breakdown. Unless you have anything else to add, Logan, on either side of the ball here?
No, man. It's in a game where it felt like they should have walked away handedly with it, to be down and then to finally win the game, like by some type of majestic football karma. It feels good to be on this side of it. So,
Yeah, the tenor of this probably would have been very different had they lost, even though the film for 90% of the game is the exact same. As for that last little bit, we're going to take 5 film breakdown, the Hail Mary, but also I want to talk about the drive at the end of the first half as well, because I have a question for Logan, Hail Mary etiquette. So we'll talk about that on Take 5 tomorrow. Be back with a preview of the Giants on Thursday. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe wherever you are watching or listening right now. And if you're watching us on YouTube, hit that like button as well. Whenever I say that, Logan, I think of Kime. So John, if you're still listening to the end here, like and subscribe like John Kime. That's Logan Paulson. I'm Craig Hoffman. We'll see you next time on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.